I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, and possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Well, thank you, Liam, and thank you, listener, for tuning into today's episode of the Oracles with James Tyson. Today, I'm bringing you J. Nathan Couch. He is a gentleman who grew up in the foothills of northeast Georgia's Appalachian Mountains, which is a kind of a spooky place to start with. Lots of old folklore and lots of ghost stories growing up in a place like that. So it was no wonder he and his buddies didn't get out there with their recorders and hang out in graveyards and weird old cemeteries back in the day and getting his teeth cut on that kind of paranormal investigation. He now lives in a place called West Bend, Wisconsin, and is the owner and operator of a tour guide company that does the ghost walks. It's called Downtown West Bend Ghost Walks. And if you go to his website, please play along at home. J. Nathan Couch, that's Couch, jnathancouch.com. You can read a little bit more about his ghost walks and the schedule that'll be coming up for 2020. He's written a couple of books. One is Washington County's Paranormal, a Wisconsin legend trip. And later on, he published the one we'll be talking about today, Goatman, Flesh or Folklore. It's pretty much a critically acclaimed book on the Goatman phenomena, because Nathan had researched not only all the stories about Goatman in the U.S. And the one story in Canada. Well, he doesn't really get into that, but we're going to talk about how Goatman in the United States and Pan and Foutas and the elemental beings in Europe all had this similar kind of look to them. And they are always seen out protecting the forest. We're going to touch briefly on the Maryland Goatman, the guy with the axe wheeling it along, and the rumor or the urban legend that it was some science experiment gone wrong, and the guy ended up turning himself into half goat, half man, which is, even in my weird supernatural brain, it would be a bit of a stretch. So we're going to talk about a few things about the folklore, the urban legend, and bat around a few things of what could this thing possibly be, and why is he seen by so many people in so many places around the world. Again, focusing more on the American side of things, because that's where Nathan's book is grounded in his home country in the U.S. When he's not writing about ghosts and monsters, he's usually talking about them, and you can see him at places like let's see there. I think there's a big Paracon, Milwaukee Paracon. Probably a staple there, showing up and talking about any of that ghostly stuff. You've probably seen him on The Unexplained with Bill Shatner. His episode was Strange Creatures. Also, the episode Wendigo in the In Search of Monsters TV series on one of those channels like Travel or Discovery or something like that. And if you want to find some other conversations with him, if you are subscribed to ZTalk Radio, ztalk.com, check him out on The Strange Side with Mike and Nate. Really good guy. So going to bring him in, kicking and screaming, all the way from West Bend, Wisconsin, and see how he's doing. Nathan, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be on here today.
Oh, thank you very much for dropping by. I'm fascinated with what you've written, your book, Goatman, Flesh or Folklore. And, of course, your other book, Washington County Paranormal, Washington County, out in the wonderful area of Wisconsin. You're not now, that's not too far. That's a little bit west of Lake Michigan, just outside of Port Washington, correct?
Yeah, it's about a county over from the lake. It's about 35, 40 minutes from, Milwaukee proper. Part of the 4-county area of Milwaukee is the southern half of Washington County. So it's very near to where Milwaukee is, but it's also just far enough away where things start to get rural. So it's not completely isolated, but you get that small town feel, and makes for an interesting atmosphere.
What got you interested in the paranormal?
Well, basically, I grew up with parents who talked about this stuff a lot. My mom definitely believed in the supernatural. I'm not entirely sure on my dad, but it was a Southern Baptist fire and brimstone type home. But around the dinner table, they would be talking about all these things when I was a very small child, like Native American curses and all this horror movie type stuff, haunted bridges and very, very disturbing things to hear when you're very young. And I don't know if my theory is that I must have been so disturbed by it that it actually went the exact opposite direction, where instead of me trying to push it away and stay away from it, I started being fascinated with it, and I wanted to know as much as I could. So things progressed into me buying the paranormal books and watching paranormal specials on television. And then when I was old enough to get away unsupervised, me and my friends would go to locations that were reputably haunted, doing that no thing of going to the cemetery after dark and all that, just to see if we'd see a ghost. And then, that led to more serious research and things of that nature. So it was a pretty natural progression. So it's paranormal and the unexplained mysteries and ghosts and cryptids have been a part of my life since as long as I can remember.
When you and your buddy used to head out, did you ever see anything? Did you get stuff which then led you to just be a bundle of more questions?
That's one of those questions that I've had people ask me, and it's one of those things that's always so hard to answer, where you can't think of something. So you say, not really, or anything like that. But then the moment you get off the interview or you're done talking to this person, you think of, this amazing thing that I didn't even think of at the time. So what I've been doing, because of questions like this, which it's an inevitable question anytime someone talks to you for the first time about this sort of thing, I started writing down all the things that happened to me, and all of a sudden it's like, yes, I've had lots of stuff happen. But the most memorable thing to me, this was probably in my mid-20s, and it puzzles me to this day. There was this road, I'm blanking on the name of it now. I don't have my notes in front of me, but there was a road in rural North Georgia, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Cleveland, Georgia. It's about 90 minutes north of Atlanta, foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. There's not a lot going on there, which is kind of one of the reasons why me and my friends are out driving around looking for ghosts at night. So, no movie theater. So we're let's go look for the ghosts. And there's a particular road where you're supposed to be able to drive down it. And the legend was there was a house that burned, and the woman there, I believe she was a witch or something along those lines. And you can see her apparition. Sometimes it's a green globe of light that'll float across the fields and disappear into a pond. And other times she appears as a large black cat, like a panther or a black mountain lion, something like that. So we drove down this road probably a dozen times and had no experiences. And I'm with a different set of friends, and they asked me about the road, and I was never the one who drove to it. so I'm like, well, this friend of mine, he always drove. So we call him, and so there's 2 carloads of us on this particular expedition. And we drive to this road, and the first thing that I notice is something that I've never experienced before on that road or anywhere else. We turn onto the road, and the light in the sky, there's always some ambient light from the moon or something, and it's green. There's a green glow to the sky, and we only saw it on this road. And there's street lights in the opposite direction, but it's not that amber glow you get from a city. It's just this dull green glow. So we drive through, and we don't see any lights or any panthers or anything like that. So we stop at this chicken farm. It's at the end of the road, and we talk to each other for a minute, like, oh, that was it. And he tells briefly the story, he being my friend who was in the other car. And then he starts leading us back out. So I'm in the car that's following him. And all of a sudden, we see him begin swerving all over the place, driving very erratically. And we thought he was goofing around. He's one of those kind of guys. And then all of a sudden, we see this black thing with its mouth open, teeth, charging at our vehicle with its eyes glowing in the headlights. And we automatically think, oh my God, it's the Panther Woman's ghost. And this thing is running at us. And then we notice right away, after our heart, calms down, that this is actually a dog. But then the most peculiar thing is this black dog, solid black dog, as we're driving along with this thing snapping on our wheels and chasing us and sounding like a hound from hell, we notice that at every driveway we pass for the next however far it took us to get to the end of the road, which wasn't very far, there was a black dog whose eyes were glowing in our headlights, just sitting like a sentinel in every driveway staring at us. And we're talking at least a half a dozen of these black dogs. And we've never, like I said, we've driven down that road dozens of times. Never saw any dogs, never heard any dogs. Like, all these dogs are identical. And, they were all just like standing guard, like they were telling us we didn't belong there. You could look at it and say, well, it was just a bunch of dogs. And maybe it was. Of course, in Appalachian folklore, black dogs are, harbingers of bad luck. The story of the musician who sold his soul to the devil on the crossroads. That was a black dog that was with the man he sold his soul to. And there's lots of other folklore about these black dogs. And the thing that really makes me wonder if it was in fact a paranormal experience is that green glow. Cannot explain that at all. You can say the dogs are just dogs, but I've never seen that green glow before or since. So
that is really cool. I had a friend of mine who's a psychic who travels around to all the different conferences and things. And she and her buddy was driving from southern Washington State down to L.A., and they're heading down Highway 101 on the coast here, and the sky changed color. And they pulled into a little town. They're going to grab something to eat, and the town itself looked like it was in a dream. And the people, like if you were to have like a basic Saturday with all the families out walking around with their kids and everything like that, pushing strollers and they were all out, and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And she said she had just the weirdest feeling. They got back on the highway, they drove a bit, pulled into another town, and it was the same town. And that happened to her all the way down Highway 101. There was geography that didn't match up to what should be on that highway at that time of year. She said it was the most bizarre thing. They also had run-ins with a car that sped up behind them and drove right through them and out the other end. So so I've heard those stories before, and it's freaky. And
it's almost like something gets out of vibration, and for a minute things are happening when they shouldn't be.
Yeah,
very peculiar. Kind of makes you even wonder about the whole multiverse theory.
Well, yeah, that's
the whole
it.
universe running right along beside us, and it's just moving at a different speed.
Oh yeah, and I've talked to people who say, well, I see fairies in the garden. Well, how come I don't see them? And we talk about like multiple dimensions and crossing dimensions and things popping in and things like that. Well, it's fascinating.
I mean, I definitely could explain a lot of experiences. You just get a glimpse of it occasionally, and that would definitely explain why no one's finding the Bigfoot's corpse, or why the ghost never appears when you want it to, or
Exactly. And that's the other thing too, is like, and then you get those people that always see them and the people that don't, and you're running around going, how come I can't see that? Like or you catch a glimpse of it and you want to see it again, and then you're off on a tangent for like 5 years trying to do that again. I found that a lot with Bigfoot people that say, well, why do you continue to hunt for Bigfoot? Well, I saw it when I was younger. I said, well, okay, you've seen one. Why do you have to keep looking for it? And it comes down to it a lot of times. It's like, well, no one believes me, so now I want to take a picture of it so I can show them so they know I'm not crazy. And I said, well,
yeah, I mean,
you're not crazy.
I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I'm not the sort of guy. I don't claim to be psychic. I don't have regular sightings of things. I feel like I may be able to tell more stories than most because, given the nature of my work, I tend to write it down. But I mean, there's some things that I've had one or two experiences that have just stuck with me, and for me, it's not really because I know no one's gonna. Most people aren't going to believe stories like the ones you hear on these types of podcasts. But for me, it's more like I don't really believe it. It happened to me sometimes, and I want to see if it'll happen again, just so I can confirm that it's not just some trick of the mind that we don't understand yet. Because there's been a couple of instances where you're like, wow. And I mean, I've done I don't know how many investigations, and so many paranormal investigations are just so boring and uneventful. Like 90% of them, maybe 99% of them, and you're lucky if you get any evidence. A lot of times nothing that blows your hair back. You're like, maybe it's this, maybe it's not. But when you have that one experience or that one or two experiences, it's enough to keep the drive going.
Oh yeah, it's just that it's like that little taste, a little tease, like going, come on, keep going. You'll get it.
Yeah, like it happened once. Like it needs to happen again. So even I can verify that I'm not full of it, as it were. So
yeah, I was talking to a guy named Bob Lazar who said years ago that he worked at a place called S4 outside of Area 51, and they were reverse engineering UFOs. And he said, dude, like I could make up a better lie. It's like, either believe me or don't. I really don't care. It's like I told the guy what I used to do. I told him what I saw. I got a better, I'm off working on my own now. I'm happily married. I don't care if you believe me or not. And
I mean, unless you're one or two very, very, fortunate people, there's not money to be made in the field of paranormal research.
No, it's ridicule, basically. Sticking to
your word that doesn't get you a lot monetarily, Well,
no, it's like, and this, it's like writing a book. Oh yeah, you wrote a book, you must be rich. No, I wrote a book. It's like,
yeah, I mean, even if you make it onto television, you get like a couple of $100 in a meal stipend and a free plane ticket, and it's not enough it's not something you can make a living off of.
No,
most of the time.
I host paranormal documentaries, and I was out and did a Bigfoot one, and it was free. But we went off to a location. We got something came into the camp that night, and sure enough, we got like these 22-inch footprints, and that weren't there the night before. Hundreds of them all over the place. And I came out of there going, that was kind of cool. But did I get money for it? Nah. I didn't really didn't want it, but I can't see somebody. A friend of mine, Russ Accord, he's in a new Bigfoot documentary, not series now, out on the Travel Channel. So, yeah, he's another guy who'll say, yeah, you don't get rich on this stuff. Plus, people look at you funny. Yeah. But you get to go to cool
unless
conferences.
The show's named after you, you're not going to be doing a lot monetary wise. So.
Yeah, the guys who make the big money on those things are the guys whose voice is in the background doing the narration.
Yeah, whoever's narrating.
Whoever does that, that's the guy who makes the money because he's getting paid good union bucks for X amount of hours at work, and the rest of the people are out there, sleeping under a log, and but it's doing it for the fun of it.
Most of the people in that level of the television and film business aren't making any money, like much less the people who are on camera. I mean, a lot of the times you listen to the producers, they're talking about living in an apartment in Los Angeles with like 7 other people because the rent there is unbelievable. So,
yeah. Dude, it's come to Vancouver, British Columbia. The rent here is a nice 600 square foot apartment for about $2,800 a month.
The entire west coast of North America until you reach a certain point in the south is kind of like that.
Yeah, we're paying a lot of money waiting for a giant earthquake and a tsunami, so we're the buffer. So what got you into the Goatman side of the paranormal? I know that Washington County out there in that part of Wisconsin is where the folklore has come around it. Tell me a little bit about your research into your book, Goatman, Flesh or Folklore. And if anybody's interested in checking out his books, just go to his website, jnathancouch.com, jnathancouch, COUCH.com, and see the books he's written there. And you could probably just Google the book, Goatman, Flesh or Folklore, and it'll pop you off to a place you could buy his book. What got you into that, the Goatman side of things?
Well, I've been interested in the whole cryptozoology thing since before I knew that term. When I think back really far, the first thing that happened was, I grew up in the foothills of the mountains, and there was these very small, I don't know if you call them foothills or if they were just very small mountains. They were either large hills or small mountains, but they surrounded my home, and pretty rural area. There were neighbors, but, they were you had to do some walking to get to them. And I was at home being babysat by my probably teenage sister, and it was night. My parents worked across the street at a little, rinky-dink auction house on the weekends as like a part-time job. And me and my sister were in our living room with the windows open because we didn't have air conditioning, and it was like probably 98 degrees and humid, being Georgia. And there was just this scream in the night, and it scared us real bad. And then we kept hearing it over and over. And my sister was able to, I don't remember if she called or somehow we got word to my parents. My dad came across the street, and he heard it, and he claimed it was a mountain lion. And it may have been a mountain lion. It definitely sounded like a woman being murdered, and that's what a mountain lion often sounds like. But that was the first time I realized there might be something unknown in the woods, because there weren't supposed to be mountain lions in that part of Georgia anymore. They had previously been a big problem historically. There's stories from older Appalachians where they used to have to stay up at night after the birth of a baby because the mountain lion would try to sneak in through the open windows to take the infant because it smelled of afterbirth. So not very long ago, my grandparents or great-grandparents would have had that fear. So that was when I really first became aware of something like that. And don't know if it was a mountain lion or what it was. Probably was some type of cat. And then, my parents would buy these Weekly World News things, and I was too young to know the Weekly World News is totally fake, so I'd read these stories that they had made up about supposedly real cryptids like the skunk ape, which I'm not saying the skunk ape's not real, but the story in the Weekly World News was definitely not real. So,
no.
Yeah, I know, right? I just discovered that recently, but no, when I got to be older, when I wasn't like 6 years old, like, oh, you mean people write fake things in supposed newspapers? But, so then that's where my interest in cryptozoology started, and then flash forward many years to where I'm living in Wisconsin. My wife works at the time for the Washington County Historical Society. This was probably 10 years ago now. And the Washington County Historical Society, of course, West Bend is located in Washington County. And that's where I got into my whole fascination with urban legends and ghost sightings in West Bend in Washington County. And I heard a story that somebody was telling at a Halloween event for the audience about this Goatman that lived in the woods outside of town. And basically it's like your Greek satyr, where it's half man, half goat, kind of more like a Roman faun. But and it would lure people into car accidents on this one particular stretch of road called Hogsback Road. And then it would take you away, never to be seen again. And that fascinated me. So I counted something like this existed. I had not heard of it before. Like, it wasn't even the weekly art business when I was a kid. So started researching it, and I never thought I'd contact anybody who had saw it. But sure enough, pretty early into my research, I was contacted by a gentleman. He said he had seen it in the woods in Kewaskum, Wisconsin, which is a little to the north of West Bend, in a much more rural part of the county. And he said he was up in a tree stand bow hunting, just before just after sunup, and he had his arrow knocked because he heard this thing coming through the woods, and I thought it was this huge deer. He was really excited. Then this thing that looked like a satyr walked out into the clearing, and he said that it was like a bare-chested man, shirtless man from the waist up, but with a big gray beard and horns or antlers. And the lower half were two legs like a goat or deer's that bent in the opposite direction of a human being's, hooved, and it was covered from the waist down in gray-brown fur. And he said it was swearing and saying all these obscenities about trespassers. And he kind of insinuated it might have been talking about him, but if it was talking about him, it apparently didn't know he was in the tree stand, because it kept walking past his out of his field of vision. And then he said the smell of it lingered. He described it as smelling like garbage and rotten animals all rolled up into one, like rotten, decomposing flesh. And he climbed down out of the tree after quite a while when he felt it was no longer in the vicinity, and he ran out of the woods. And, of course, that made me really fascinated in the creature. So I started finding all these creatures that were just like Goatman, but with different names from all around the country. There's versions of it, Texas and California and, Maryland. Most states in the United States seem to have some type of sighting or legend about a creature just like Goatman. So I started compiling all that together into a book to sort of unify all this information.
So you kind of collected the national, we'll call it folklore, about those types of beings, putting it all together and kind of matching it up with what's been seen or purported to be seen in your area, because that area seems to be the more well-known Goatman sighting area in Wisconsin there.
Yeah, it's becoming one. I would say it wasn't before my book came out, and I don't know exactly how such a book as mine that hasn't been read by very many people has made that happen. But definitely a lot more people reference Wisconsin now when they talk about Goatman. Previously, the most famous version known purely as Goatman was the Goatman of Bowie in Bowie, Maryland, which is a suburb now of just outside Washington. So at the time when the sightings took place in the 60s and 70s, it was a pretty wild rural area. Of course, now it's been swallowed up by, Washington, D.C. But that was definitely the one that everyone talked about. I think that one appeared in the X-Files comic book, and there's been movies about it. Okay. And there's some other more famous versions, too. Like I would say the Lake Worth Monster in Fort Worth, Texas is very famous, but not a lot of people know that he's related to Goatman because he has such a unique name. And then Poplick Monster as well in Louisville, Kentucky is another that's very famous. But again, the word Goatman isn't his most famous name. So that's what I've noticed. The phenomenon about Goatman was everyone thought their Goatman was the only Goatman. And then, you'd see the Poplick Monster in books about Louisville, and you'd see the Lake Worth Monster in books about Texas. And, even here in Wisconsin, West Bend and Kewaskum are less than they're less than half an hour apart. But Kewaskum thought the Goatman was strictly in Kewaskum and didn't know about the one in West Bend and vice versa. So for whatever reason, these stories and sightings were very isolated from one another.
Have you cross-referenced, you've obviously cross-referenced the ones that are North American or American, but did you also kind of go into what used to be basically called the Greek god of the hillside, Pan, and things like that were seen all through Europe back before the Christianity kind of pushed them out into that whole category of demons, and then people wouldn't say they saw them anymore. But are they similar?
Yeah. Well, the Goatman is definitely similar to the depictions of Satan that you see in post-Christian world paintings, or because what the devil is described as looking like is exactly matches up what very popular nature deities like Pan and Foutas, the Greek and Roman, nature gods would look like. It was definitely modeled after him because Pan and Foutas, especially Pan and Foutas, especially Pan, were the most popular gods in their respective pantheons because they dealt with nature, fertility, shepherds, things of that nature, things that the masses would definitely be interested in. You didn't have to be some wealthy or important person to be worried about fertility or the future of your flock or the trees around your home. So I think that's one of the reasons why that particular image was chosen to represent the ultimate evil in this younger religion. And the book does deal with that a little bit. The main focus is sightings in America, because I did look for sightings in Mexico and Canada, and I found a couple of fleeting little sentences about Canada, but I could never find anything to really research. I couldn't get any information other than, some town, they say there's a Goatman, and then I could never find a single other thing about it. But there is one or two chapters that does deal with Pan and Foutas and what they represent, and some famous historical sightings of satyrs. I know there are still sightings of these things happening in contemporary Europe and in the British Isles, and they don't call them Goatman there. They still call them satyrs or fawns. So the book doesn't really deal a lot with what's going on in the old world, but it definitely acknowledges it because they're definitely part of the same phenomenon.
Yeah, that's what I think too. It's satyrs a little bit different. They don't have the cloven hoofs. They mostly, a lot of times you don't even see them depicted with feet. And the closest thing they had to horns might have been every so often a Roman artist would put a couple of bumps on their head, but the Pan had the more goat horn looking protrusions. Never really ram's horns unless you're, watching a 20th century movie or something. And they really want to make it.
Yeah, the blending of the fawns and the satyrs really happened after Greece got swallowed by the Roman world. A very early satyr art depicted just a handsome young man with bushy horse-like tails and large, almost like donkey-like ears. And then faun was so similar to Pan, they became blended together. And the fawns, which were followers of Faunus, looked exactly like Pan. And so that's when you started seeing things in artwork that were marked satyr that had those cloven hooves and horns. So, yeah, it's one of those interesting things that happen when one culture swallows up another.
Oh yeah, it's funny how the being itself, the names changed, but the being itself was kind of kept similar to
the fawns and the satyrs. Yeah, they were both definitely nature spirits and had a similar role in their cultures, and one image more popular than the other probably because faun and Pan look so much like these things. So.
Have you ever been to a psychic?
I have not had a reading done on myself, but I've conversed with them, and I've worked near or around them.
Okay, I had a reading done a while ago. I had if you're familiar with spirit guides, each of us have spirit guides and things like that. Mm-hmm. I had a spirit guide who was a woman who had a tri-peaked hat, like, the 1700s kind of hats. She took a step back, and my spirit guide that came in was Pan.
Okay.
Like, the little, Faunus shows up. And I'm like, what? She goes, oh, yeah, this is really funny. You have Pan as a spirit guide. And Pan hung around here for about a year. Up until about 2 or 3 months ago. That was really weird. Why I'd have this being show up. And she told me that these are elemental beings. So they're part of the earth itself, which is a lot of times why they've been seen from, all through history. But I don't know if that's what we're seeing when we're talking about Goatman. If it's the same, it sounds like it. Honestly, the way that witness described to you as this thing cursing and swearing about trespassers on the land, kind of thing, that is very Pan-like. Really grumpy and trying to get everything, trying to fix everything, because people come in and they're trying to keep the hillsides going and things like that. In my understanding, what those beings as elemental beings are supposed to do, that sounded kind of like that would have been Pan kind of thing. But to be, sometimes these things are described as being really tall, which isn't what I picture those elemental beings as being, and whether or not elemental beings are, again, we get into that whole multi-dimensional thing. You ever talk to anybody about almost accepting that kind of being exists, and then taking a step back and saying, okay, if it exists, how does it work?
Well, just backtracking a moment, your story about your spirit guide being this faun or satyr or what type of creature it is, there are a lot of stories like that from the Victorian era and on up that comes out of Europe, where a certain person who is sensitive can see a faun attached to a certain person, or that a certain person who is chosen by these things to be visited by them, then they can see them. And in the case of the ones when they make themselves known to you, like you were alluding to my Goatman witness I'd spoken to earlier about maybe these things are offended about people coming into nature and harming it. A lot of the times these things have some ecological message that they're trying to deliver, at least in Europe anyway. The sightings in North America, however, tend to be more troubling. But these things definitely do appear to be elementals, because inevitably people ask me what I think they are. And I always say that there is pretty much a zoological impossibility as far as we've never found anything like them to have ever existed in the zoological record. And I really don't think these things could be, the ones in America anyway, could be some sort of undiscovered type of creature like a Sasquatch, because they don't live in the Pacific Northwest or some vast stretch of woodlands. They live oftentimes in the shadows of high schools and things like this. They're actually known among folklore as lovers' lane monsters because they're so frequently seen by young people or even older for that matter who go to these lovers' lanes. So, there is a big difference there. But I haven't talked to a lot of people in this country who believe that they are elementals, but I definitely believe they are. What makes them behave so much more bestial and aggressive in this country as opposed to their European cousins, I couldn't say. Could it be that they have more to be angry about in North America? Possibly, because, I mean, there are evidence that the Native Americans were aware of these things, your First Nations people. There are satyr-shaped mounds in the Midwest right here in Wisconsin that look exactly like Goatman. And people talk about how these things are representations of the Native American hero Red Horn, or maybe it's a stylized version of someone in a headdress. But the mounds that exist in Wisconsin, at least, that look like these satyrs, the most famous is Man Mound in Baraboo, Wisconsin. So if anybody's sitting at the computer right now, definitely take a look at that amazing structure. This thing, this mound was built by so long ago that there's no information about these mound builders other than the mounds they had left behind and the evidence contained therein. When Europeans arrived in the Midwest, the woodland Indians had said the mounds had always been there and they didn't know who built them. It's very likely that it's ancestors of the more modern tribes, but we don't know that. Was it a lost people? Or even if it was just ancestors of the woodland Indians, these woodland Native Americans, that would it really be a depiction of Red Horn, this Native American hero? Because we don't know if the belief in Red Horn existed then. So there's a lot we don't know. There's a set of effigy mounds in Washington County, just outside of West Bend, like 5-minute drive outside of the city. These amazing, beautiful mounds. There were burial mounds, and they're in all sorts of shapes. It's called Lizard Mound Park. There's no lizards in Wisconsin, so they eventually discovered the lizard mound was actually a stylized depiction of a turtle. But there's the turtle mound, which is more famously known as the lizard mound, and then there's all these water spirit effigy mounds, which look a lot like mountain lions and these conical shapes and all this. And they built a very nice, expensive, solar-powered kiosk where you can press buttons and they tell you all about the mound builders and the more modern tribes. And when you press the button about who were the mound builders, you get a lot of double talk. It's like being at some kind of political rally where the question is asked and you get a lot of information but no answer.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot we don't know about these people. I mean, we know they had commerce with people as far away as the Gulf Coast. We know they were pretty advanced. We think that the mounds were built as a way to signify where water was. But we don't know for a fact what Man Mound represented. And there's evidence from tribes on the East Coast. I'm really sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the tribe. It's in that whole Maryland, Virginia area where early Europeans who arrived said that this tribe would dress and horns and paint this quote unquote horned devil on their chest and dance around in ceremonies. And that sounds a lot like a faun or, Pan or Faunus. So there seems to be some sort of ancient tradition with these things. It seems to be the connection has been lost. And there's a lot of sightings I've noticed of these things on Native American reservations. Every time I talk to someone who lives near or on the reservations in Green Bay, Wisconsin, for example, they always tell me about how they got stories of Goatman growing up and they would see this thing. So maybe that whole aggressive side comes from the mistreatment of the native peoples. It's just wild speculation on my part, but yeah, that's one reason why I definitely believe these things are elemental in nature.
Yeah, it's fascinating. If it's like talking to First Nations people here who've been on we call them reserves here, and some of them like right into the mountains in the Pacific Northwest here, and they're full of stories about Sasquatch. It's like, yeah, we see them. What's the big deal? And it's you white people that seem to be all excited about it, but yeah, we just hang out with them, or they're just there.
The creatures that are reported on reservation land are always so much more exotic than the things that are encountered anywhere else. I don't know why that is. There was another researcher, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but I came across him because he was saying they were seeing all these basically these creature sightings. They're getting all these reports on reservation land out in New Mexico. And he said that in this one particular article I was reading where he was speaking to a reporter, he said that they got more centaur sightings than they did Sasquatch sightings. And centaurs, I mean, that's a whole other level of strangeness in the world of cryptozoology.
Oh, heck yeah.
That's even stranger than Goatman. So
yeah, you'd be screaming away from you're driving your truck away from a centaur sighting and get pulled over. They'd be checking your breath and your blood alcohol and whatever else is in your system. Honestly, I've
actually done quite a bit of research. Yeah, I've actually done quite a bit of research on the whole centaur thing once I found out about that, but I just don't have anywhere to publish it at the moment. But there's a lot of sightings around the world of centaurs. So it's very strange that these archetypes from European mythology keep, reappearing in modern day and sort of sightings where, the same sort of kind of mundane way that someone in Tasmania says they saw a Tasmanian tiger, which of course is not mundane in the fact that it's supposed to be extinct, but it was a once a living creature that vanished within recorded history. And meanwhile, you have people who are seeing Goatman and centaurs in such a matter-of-fact way that and these things are not known to have ever existed. So these things, if they're being seen, they have to be some type of supernatural type experience as opposed to the thylacine sightings and where if they are seeing it, it very likely might be one who has managed, some group out there of them that have managed to survive.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about them as being something that's just lived in the forest and we just haven't paid attention to it because, these forests have been occupied by either First Nations or the Europeans popping in and out of them long enough. Somebody's going to trip over a half man, half horse. If these are what we would consider an animal, then there has to be a breeding stock. There'd have to be enough of them over the last 1,000+ years to breed. And then we've got to find bones. So, it's not like it's a wild being or a wild animal, but it makes more sense that it's buying into the whole multidimensional and supernatural side of things. Which is kind of funny now. Science gets to a certain point and says, well, I can't explain it. Okay, we'll put it over to the supernatural pile. Well, hold on. You just dumped all this stuff into the what if pile, basically, because it's what are we going to do? How can we prove it?
When you talk about Sasquatch, I think a lot of people, if you want to be a purist, the term Bigfoot should be reserved to creatures in the Pacific Northwest, because they're very much a very plausible type of sighting. They behave in a very plausible type of way, and there's plenty of wilderness for them to have a very small breeding population, especially if they have an intelligence that is somewhere between, a gorilla and a human being, or if not equal to a human being. They could definitely figure out ways of not being seen if they view us as a danger. So, but then, like with Eastern Bigfoot sightings, some cryptozoologists actually do classify them as the Eastern Bigfoot. They start getting into that realm where they live in areas where they shouldn't be able to stay hidden, and they exhibit supernatural type qualities, where some of them seem to be, a lot of them, in fact, seem to be impervious to gunshots and things of that nature, well, which no living creature we know of is impervious to gunshots. But when you have Goatman and these centaurs, very rarely do they behave like actual
living
animals, like actual flesh and blood creatures. They will always be some type of supernatural aspect. I mean, when you talk about the Goatman of Bowie, 99% of the sightings are actually sightings that sound like some type of small Bigfoot. So there are a couple of horned and hooved type creatures that have been reported in a couple of isolated incidents, but that's the only incidents where you really seem to have these Goatmen, quote unquote, behaving like actual living creatures. When they have the horns and hooves, there's almost always some kind of supernatural element. I believe Nick Redfern, who's just an amazing writer and cryptozoologist, writes a lot about stuff in Texas. He was talking at some appearance and encountered a lady who was walking around White Rock Lake in Dallas, and that's very near to Fort Worth, where the Lake Worth monster is seen, and they have their own version of Goatman at White Rock Lake. And she was jogging around the White Rock Lake when she had what she can only describe as a panic attack. She had never had one like that before. And she looked off the trail and she saw a Goatman standing there, and it grinned at her. And I can't remember if it just stood there or if it approached her a little bit. But in either case, it never got very near to her, and it disappeared in a flash. And it left behind this sulfuric smell. And that is very much something that no known animal species can do. And, of course, Nick Redfern made the connection that she suddenly felt panic before seeing it. And, of course, Pan's name is where the word panic comes from. And the stories of Pan is if you disturb him while he's resting in the wild places, then he'll cause you to have this panic that will result in you injuring yourself or even dying. Pan's pretty much a trickster in that sense, has our fauns and satyrs in mythology. So you really start having some of these mythological behaviors in a lot of these sightings of your horned and hoofed Goatman, and not your Bigfoot type creature seen near an area where they talk about Goatman.
Oh, that's fascinating. We are talking to J. Nathan Couch. He is a author and a paranormal investigator, and wrote the book Goatman, Flesh or Folklore, and along with another book, Washington County Paranormal, about all the things that go bump in the night out in Washington County, down in Wisconsin, just off of Lake Michigan. Nathan, you in your research, and obviously you've had the opportunity since you've written the book to talk to a lot more people and get a lot more information coming in about Goatman. Have you kind of looked at the Maryland Goatman with the axe and kind of compared it to everybody else? Was that more folklore with the guy like that Goatman walking around with an axe, like swinging at cars and stuff like that? More of a kind of the urban legend that kind of blew up compared to all the other information that you've kind of dug up?
Yeah, the really difficult thing about researching Goatman when I first started was it was very hard pulling actual sightings out of the mire of folklore, which is where that whole Fletcher folklore part of the title came from, because the book ended up basically having two different directions. There's the actual sightings where someone said this happened, it was reported in the newspaper and or to a researcher, and then there are the crazy stories that surround these things. For instance, the one in Wisconsin has a story about how he slaughtered this Civil War soldier who was driving a wagon late at night with his wife inside it after he'd came back from the war, and she found his body hanging from a tree, which is very similar to urban legends, the dead boyfriend urban legend folklorists call it, where the boy goes outside to investigate something. He doesn't come back. The girl gets scared because she hears a scraping on the roof, and she goes outside, and the boyfriend's hanging from a tree. I mean, that story, those two stories probably have the same root. So that's definitely folklore.
Yeah.
I mean, Hogback Road in Wisconsin did exist during the Civil War era, but that story happening that way probably didn't happen.
Yeah, and the girl who went outside after hearing the noise was wearing a negligee and holding a lantern that didn't work properly, and went straight to the scary noise part. Yeah.
And that could explain why a lot of these types of sightings are said to happen in Lover's Lanes, while Goatman is another Lover's Lane type monster. It's because a lot of the elements there, a lot of the stories involving Goatman line up with the fact that it's like a bad horror movie or an urban legend. In the case of the Goatman of Bowie, where he's supposed to be, there's a couple of versions of his origin. The most famous one is he was like a science experiment at the BARC research facility, which I think BARC stands for the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, which is an FDA facility where the government has genetically produced different types of animals for human consumption. For instance, they came up with the Beltsville white turkey there, which is basically the ancestor of all the turkeys that people in North America eat on Thanksgiving because they produce more meat on less feed. The same thing for the meat type hog that was engineered at that particular facility just outside of Washington, D.C., where, again, they get bigger for less feed. Supposedly, Goatman escaped from Beltsville. There's a lot of very strange, nonsensical reasons he was created. Some people say, I think the leading one is somebody was trying to create a cure for cancer. I don't understand how you'd come up with Goatman doing this. Yeah. So that's why I believe that it's not true, because it's just, I mean, maybe if this story was they were trying to make a bigger, tastier goat, it might make sense.
Yeah.
But they say he escaped from here and he found an axe and he goes on a rampage. And other than a strange, hairy creature has been witnessed a couple of times abusing pets in the area. As far as I know, no one's actually ever seen him with the axe. That's probably all just nonsense. There's the what is his name? It's the Southern California version of Goatman, the Beast of Billiwhack, in Southern California, down south of Los Angeles. He lives in an old abandoned building on an old lemon grove, and the origin story for him is that he was some result of a failed super soldier experiment. It reads almost exactly like the origin of Captain America, but with some Frankenstein sprinkled on top. So you have all these strange stories that in no way would they ever be true. But then a lot of times you end up with people actually having a very believable encounter with what's there. So it's a real twofold thing. So a lot of these stories associated around these creatures can obviously be nothing more than bunk. But then you have people come forward with stories that very well could result in them being laughingstocks of their community, which to me says they saw something that they can't explain, and they want people to know about it, and they want it to be understood in some way. Like maybe this will help solve the mystery, and they risk their reputation for it. So, I mean, you have a bit of that in every field of the unexplained, but where you obviously some fiction that works its way into the lore around these creatures. But with Goatman, there seems to be a lot of fiction that works its way in there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's the way, well, fiction. It's us humans. We like to add things. We like to, if we want to make something scary, give it an axe. What the heck? If it was kind of funny, it dawned on me with this thing, the Goatman kind of hanging around at Lover's Lane. Mm-hmm. Pan is famous for his sexual powers. and it was a story that he was actually he was taught how to masturbate from his father, Hermes, and he taught that habit to the shepherds. So who knows? He might have been just hanging out saying, "Hey guys, this is what we're going to be doing." A bit of a seducer too. He's supposed to have seduced another goddess or something like that. So he's a bit of a tramp, that young man. So who knows? Was
I believe,
or was it Pan? So
I believe Pan was in love with one of the nymphs, which is a nature spirit. Unless I'm blending two things here, so I'm not exactly a Greek mythology expert. So if I make a mistake here, someone please bear with me. But he was definitely in love with a female mythological entity, and I believe she turned herself into some reeds to get away from him. And in his anger that she had did something like that, he cut down the reeds and made his panpipe. Which is where he got his pipes from. So he was a very lusty god, and the satyrs, whether or not they should look like goats or horses, they loved the nature spirits, the nymphs as well. And in mythology, when there was no nymphs available, the satyrs would very much pursue human women. So all of these nature entities, these elementals, they all seem to be very lusty creatures, whatever they are.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating when you start looking at, some guy named Kevin 3 weeks ago saw something at the end of his street, and you go down and talk to him about it, and Kevin's like 25 years old, has never read anything from ancient Europe. And all of a sudden what he's describing, you're going, hold on, I remember that from a book, and that was some Roman thing that I think you're describing one of these, and you show him the picture and going, yeah, that's what I saw. Like, how did that connect? And we're getting a few of those, and it seems to be in the last about 10 or 15 years, we have more of the overlap of people seeing stuff that it throws back to people who are seeing these over history.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Greek mythology, I mean, that's something that it's taught in schools and a lot of people know about it. But I think where a lot of this stuff comes from is a lot of this stuff existed in the old world and it had other names, but then that's forgotten now that, America has been America or Canada has been Canada or what have you for however many years, because people forget these things because it's not part of our culture so much anymore. Jerome Clark, one of my favorite researchers of all time, he documents a story, I believe it's his book, The Unexplained, where this person, I think it takes place here in Wisconsin, actually. I haven't read the story in ages, but he was walking along his street at night. This occurred in fairly modern times, like within the last 50 years, I believe. And everything was eerily quiet, and he heard these voices, these strange little voices and footsteps coming, and he jumped off the sidewalk and hid. And this troop of very small men in little boots went, stomping by. And in Europe, it would have been called a fairy sighting or a brownie sighting or something like that. But he didn't have that knowledge, so he just thought it was a troop of very strange little men. And if that had taken place, across the Atlantic, it would have been a very different story. So you really can see how a lot of the folklore of Europe matches up to things that people are experiencing today, not only in Europe but here in the United States. So a lot of these things seem to be universal.
Yeah, and they seem to be. I don't know if it's Nathan. I don't know if it's us because we're so open to things that are paranormal, supernatural, metaphysical now, or and seeing them more often, or are they occurring more often and we are now not afraid to say it? Or hold on, let me get that right. Are they occurring more often, or are they occurring like they always have, but now witnesses aren't going to be called crazy when they come out and say it?
I think a part of it is that when someone has one of these sightings, I mean, they do seem to be more open to talking about it now. And I think a lot of that comes from how easy it is to communicate, because you have the internet, you have all this mass media like television, radio, all this stuff. So when you see something and you are brave enough to say it, and there is an atmosphere of, I don't want to call it acceptance, but you turn on the television or the radio or go on the internet, and there's all sorts of stuff from the Fortean world out there where it's not as taboo a subject anymore. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say it's mainstream, but it's definitely not as taboo in most parts of North America. So these people are more open, and then they can tell a much bigger audience. Like if I saw Goatman tonight, I could go on any number of forums and post it, and thousands, if not millions, of people could see it instantly. When a lot of the more famous researchers were just starting out, they would hear one or two isolated little stories and start digging there. And then even when they were collecting this information, you'd have to subscribe to some journal that they were publishing out of their basement. Yeah. And there might only be like 100 copies of it ever printed, and it's got this amazing story from this eyewitness included in it. So, I mean, there's a lot of great sightings that occurred that if the original person who documented it is no longer with us, or the witness themselves, they get lost quick. So you find, luckily, some of these journals are being scanned and archived out there. But so there's probably a lot more of these things that were recorded we don't know about anymore. And then there was probably a lot of sightings where maybe people wanted to tell someone, but they told the local deputy, and he kind of just made fun of them, brushed it off. And if he ever wrote it down at all, police departments only keep their records for so long. Those are long gone. But now you put something on the internet, it's up there forever, for good or for bad.
Yeah, no kidding.
Just ask anybody on Twitter. So
I was a policeman in Canada for 28 years, and people. I was being interviewed once. They said, "Well, what did you do with UFO reports when they came in?" I said, "I never had one." Like, how about Bigfoot? Nope. Because people, I think, a lot of times weren't going to say it out loud, or not get a hold of the police and say, "Hey, look, there's a UFO in my backyard," or "A Bigfoot is taking apples out of my tree," because I think
unless you think they're
ridicule.
Yeah, I mean, unless you feel like these things are immediately posing a dangerous risk, what good is it to tell policemen? What's the cop going to do? Or go out and arrest Bigfoot? I mean, it's not really their job. Really, when cops get this information, it's because, well, who else do I tell?
yeah, and that's what it is too. It's a friend of mine, John D'Souza, he's a retired FBI guy who, when he was a rookie, he got stuck on the desk getting all the weird UFO complaints. And over time, a couple of retired guys went back and, through Freedom of Information Act or whatever, they accessed a few of those old files that were on his desk and took him to LA, and that's where the first bits and pieces came out for the writing of the X-File TV series. So they all originated on John's desk, like he's kind of the original X-Man, but he'd been seeing UFOs ever since he was a little kid. And this is one of the things he and I used to talk about, and he put out a book. It had 52 stories, and they're all from police and FBI guys who encountered stuff at work. that you couldn't really tell even the guys you worked with, because guess who's not getting invited to coffee tomorrow? Yeah, James, he said he saw some UFOs, picked up Bigfoot, and went to a prom. It's like, yeah, okay, we're not going to invite him anymore.
There's a couple of really good ghost sightings that I've gotten from police officers in the Washington County area that I'm pretty sure no official report was ever filed for.
Yeah, you don't want to say anything, because how you going to explain it? Like, I got pushed. I was at on a property in 1997 or 98. 98. Just my last year in uniform. And we got called out to an area. It was an old shut down psych hospital called Riverview. And some kids just, drinking beer, running around, doing what you and I did when we were kids. So you kind of go out there and wiggle the flashlights and say, hey, you kids, get out of here. So just getting ready to leave, and I get pushed from behind, and I turn around because, it's a spooky place in the middle of the night, all these old 1930s buildings. And I turn around thinking it was one of the guys I work with, and there was nobody there. And I was like, damn it, don't do that. But, who do you tell? Yeah, you may tell somebody over a beer later, but you're not going to write it down.
Yeah, there's a pretty famous sighting that happened, I want to say back in the 1980s in western Wisconsin, out near the Iowa border, in this town called Mineral Point, where this police officer chased this thing that he described as basically looking like a movie vampire. He saw it; it had the cape and the whole 9 yards, and he said it was standing in the cemetery, and he pursued it, and it ran so fast he couldn't keep up with it, and it jumped several feet in the air like an Olympic long jumper over this very high fence and disappeared. Became known as the Mineral Point Vampire, and he told the story. And granted, he did have a reputation as being a bit of a jokester in the community. There was one incident where him and his friends dressed up like a gorilla and were scaring people. So he's not the most credible person on earth despite being a police officer, but he got so much ridicule from people, not only in the community, but right there in the force, that he ended up quitting law enforcement. And I don't know if he quit entirely, but he moved completely away from Mineral Point. He had to leave the place he grew up because he came forward with this granted very incredible story. So yeah, I mean, definitely. Not only it's dangerous to tell these stories, at least maybe not as dangerous as it was then as it is. It might be less dangerous now than it was then. But whether you're a cop or a lawyer, the waitress at the truck stop, no matter what job you have, you can get some real razzing over this. I mean, he picked up and moved, and I've moved a few times in my life, and that's serious business. So you don't just move because of a little lighthearted ribbing.
Yeah, it's a kick. If you're gonna quit your job and leave town, then
it's no easy thing.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, and if you had really seen this thing, and that's the whole. If you could have turned around and said, "Yeah, I was just kidding," but if it got to a point where it was like, I wasn't kidding, guys. I really saw this, and they're basically calling them crazy. Yeah, you better.
Yeah, to my knowledge, he never retracted his sighting. You think if he was getting so much flack, he would say, no, it was just a goof. But no, he quit his job and he picked up and moved. And, I mean, there are easier ways to get out of something than just owning up to your prankish nature.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know you need to be very honest as a law enforcement agent. I don't know that making up a Bela Lugosi story would result in you being fired. I mean, you might get a suspension. But, I mean, if he was making it up, you think he would have just came out with it. So, I mean, he ended up having to leave the job anyway. So.
Yeah, I kind of joked around a lot when I was a policeman. I remember pulling over some young kids doing what young guys do in the middle of the night, just driving around dad's car.
Yeah.
not doing anything illegal, but it's about midnight, and I thought, well, this car's kind of moving slow and it's full of people. So I checked it, and in Alberta, in Canada, if you're an organ donor, there's a little sticker that goes on your driver's license. So I checked everyone's ID and I handed it all back, and I held off from the drivers and I said, hey, Billy, I see you're an organ donor. we've had a terrible accident and we need a liver. You'll have to come with me. And the look on the kid's face was, I'd probably never, ever seen a policeman other than the guy who would come to his elementary school and talk to him about safety bearer and stuff like that. And the look on his face, but everyone else in the car got the joke and they're starting to start laughing. And this poor guy's like, oh, can I call my mom? I said, no, it's, you're an organ donor. Yeah. Anyway, I hadn't seen him. I saw him a couple of years later at our office. He was filling out some paperwork, and I said, "Hey, what are you up to?" He goes, "Oh, I'm just I'm applying to be a policeman." I was like, "That's kind of cool." And
I guess you never saw that. I guess you never saw the Monty Python sketch about the organ donors.
Oh yeah, that's where I got it from. It's like, yeah, but I'm not dead yet. So I'm thinking afterwards. I'm thinking to myself, oh, the only reason he wants to be a Mountie is he wants to go pull a joke on somebody else. So I can just see him. Yeah, it's small town. Try to do what you can to make everybody laugh, but
I'm sure if he ever did become a cop, that would probably definitely be on his to-do list.
Be on the to-do list. Yeah, it's kind of spooky. Now, you before I let you go, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you do now. And we didn't have time really to jump too far into Washington County Paranormal, your book. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is you have ghost walks where you are, and they're coming up again in 2020 here. Tell us a little bit about those and what you do.
Well, Washington County Paranormal was my very first book, and that's sort of what the gateway was to going from just being a paranormal enthusiast to someone who appears on these podcasts and does research. And basically, like I said earlier, my wife was working for the Historical Society at that point, and it was very easy for me to do my research, and I decided I always wanted to write a book, and so I wanted to really do this, but I also wanted to protect myself because I didn't know if I was a good writer. I still don't, but I figure, well, if this thing tanks and it's an embarrassment, I can just do like the Murderous Vampire Cop and just blow out of town, and not many people remember it. So I wrote one about Washington County and researched all the local legends, and that's actually where I first heard about Goatman. My first writing about Goatman appears in that book, and then he got his own book because it was such a huge topic. But so I needed a way to get that published because I self-publish my books. And basically, those tours came about because I realized a lot of my West Bend research was in a very concentrated area in the middle of downtown. And so I took that content to make the tours as a fundraiser for the sake of the books. And they ended up being so well received in the community and such fun for me that I've kept them around since. And they started in, I think, 2010 or 2011. I lose track of time. And I skipped a couple of years in there because I was out of the area briefly, but they're still ongoing. And basically, we start in front of the old jailhouse and courthouse there in downtown, and we talk about all the spirits there as well as many others along the way. It's about a 90-minute, 1.2 mile round trip tour. And there's actually so many spots in that area of West Bend that there's 3 or 4 that I can't even include on the tour because it would just end up being, God forbid, a 3-hour tour, if anybody still gets a Gilligan Island reference. But
yeah, I do.
So basically, that's where those tours came from. So
that's kind of cool. I'm glad you're doing that too, because it kind of gets you out there and keeps your hand in asking all those questions. If anybody wants to, or anyone actually has a story, Goatman or anything else paranormal, go to Nathan's website again, jnathancouch, and .com, and you'll see a thing he's got set up there where you can actually submit one of your stories. And it is kind of cool.
There's a lot of Goatman content on that website's blog that's not in the book, because after the book came out, I was just bombarded with people telling me about stories from towns I've never heard of. I actually found out there's a Goatman that's supposed to live in the Los Angeles National Forest. Los Angeles is a huge city, and somehow that particular version is flown under the radar for the most part. So there's all sorts of stuff on there if you're really into the minutia of this topic.
There's a lot. If you ever get a chance to go to Los Angeles, that is what hasn't burnt or hasn't washed away in a flood.
Unfortunately,
there's a large rural area. Like it's a lot of scrub.
I was surprised by it.
Yeah. You want to get
right outside of the city.
Cougar attacks there, coyotes all over the place. Yeah, they come. It's right on the edge. LA's jammed between the ocean and the mountains, so it you got a lot of wild area out there, even south, all the way down to Pendleton, where the Marine Corps base is. Camp Pendleton's huge, and it's all, I shouldn't say all, but it's mostly just rural. You're not going to walk around out there without getting blown up, but you don't want to go to a Marine Corps training facility unannounced in this part of the century anyway. There's some very, very rural areas, and if you ever flew across, like from Seattle to Florida, look out the window, and the U.S. is empty. Like it's a vast wilderness. There's small towns and a lot of farm area and a lot of places to hide. It's it's a big place.
When you, I've taken that plane ride from Milwaukee to Los Angeles a couple of times, and for the most part, you're just flying over nothing. I mean, you might hit Denver if you have a certain flight plan, but for the most part, it's just huge mountains, and you'll see a tiny parking lot with 3 cars around it and a small building, and you wonder what it is, and then just nothing but desert or forest or some really isolated places. Like some of the roads that go through the mountains near Colorado, it's like I wouldn't drive down that when the weather's nice. There's some very intimidating landscapes in the United States, and I'm sure in Canada too. Definitely in Canada. I mean,
ours is flat. Once you get out of the off the coast and into Alberta, you get up on that plateau, and it's friggin' flat. You can
the plains.
You can see yourself driving. Like it's sat flat. You can see around the world and look at your tailgate going, I'm in front of myself. Yeah, it is.
You guys have so much unpopulated land up there, though, north of you. It's very inhospitable, but like who knows what's in there,
Yeah, it's. I worked in northern Alberta as a Mountie, and I've actually, in my career in Royal Canadian Mounted Police, I've been to the Yukon, Northwest Territories, every province except the Maritime provinces, and no, that'll be about it. The Maritime provinces. And a few bouncing around a few places in U.S. too. It's a vast area and not a lot of people. Like you say, it's the majority of our population is within 50, 60 miles of the U.S. border. And,
you're probably huddling for warmth, I'd imagine. When I read the weather reports from southern Canada, it's like how you people live there. And, I couldn't imagine they're the ones who live in northern Canada.
That's southeastern Canada. Like here in the Southwest, like it's the same weather as Seattle. We live in a rainforest. So it's not too bad. We get the Japanese current that keeps the ocean warm here, so nothing really freezes. But and I really enjoy, like I have a motorcycle. My buddy and I drive down to South Dakota. We go down the highways into California and things like that, and hit all the small towns like Deadwood, South Dakota, and a few of the smaller places in Wyoming and Montana. It's great, and again, not a lot of population up there either. It's
I think it's South or North Dakota, but one of those states just keeps shrinking in population. I can't remember which one I was having at the most, but there's basically a lot of new ghost towns starting to develop in that particular region of the U.S.
Oh, it's crazy! If you can get out here just to putter around, and then we're going to ride our bikes to Sturgis, South Dakota again this year, and on the way back, we want to stop off at. Have you heard of the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah?
I have heard of it, but I'm not terribly knowledgeable of it.
It's crazy, supernatural, paranormal, UFOs, dogman, wolves standing on their hind legs, crazy. And right across the fence from the Skinwalker Ranch, which is well guarded, and guys driving around in golf carts with assault rifles because they want to keep you off. Right next door on the other side of the fence. That part
sounds familiar.
Yeah. The other side of the fence is a place called the Blind Frog Ranch, which is open. And believe it or not, spooky stuff doesn't pay attention to the fences. So you can go on the Blind Frog Ranch and see all the same stuff you can that people run into on the Skinwalker Ranch. And it's, there hasn't been a documentary done on it. My buddy of mine, Jeremy Corbell, did a documentary on the Skinwalker Ranch, and it's really, really fascinating if you can get a chance to ever see that. But, the other one's on the other side of the fence, and ghosts and monsters and UFOs and aliens, they don't really pay attention to the fence line. So drop by next time you're out in Utah.
Yeah. Definitely, there's so much stuff in the Western U.S. that I feel like I'm missing out on. I definitely need to expand on that. I mean, some of these places have just had just such a brutal history. I mean, you have that same history here in Wisconsin, but I'd love to get out to Donner Pass. I don't know if it's haunted, but I can't believe it isn't.
You live in an area where you're within a century and a bit from the Civil War. You had stuff happening, like violent, horrible things happening not too far from where you live.
I mean, Wisconsin's a pretty new state. I mean, and of course, hardly anything was documented by the original peoples that lived here. They were kind of an oral culture, and then you come in and destroy a big chunk of that culture and displace it, and then you've lost a lot of that culture. And that's, for instance, the oldest home in West Bend where I do the tour is actually on the ghost tour, and it only dates back to the 1850s. And you say that's old here in the New World, and then somebody who is living in a building in London that's been there for 300-400 years, they just kind of laugh at that. But so who knows what sort of things have happened in any given location here in Wisconsin that we'll never know about, that might be an instigator for, some type of phenomenon.
Well, you get that in Wisconsin. We get that here. All our buildings are 1850s, maybe late 1700s if it's like an old trapper's thing, if that. But you will get people from the eastern Canada, like Quebec, who their buildings go back to the 1600s. Or earlier. It's like I was down in Gettysburg. At the battlefield, that town has got buildings in it from the 1700s, and they're crazy haunted, and it's just because they've been around a long time. But again, we were talking, I think, a bit off air about the water, and if you're near a large body of water that has movement to it, it generates enough electricity or energy that no matter what or when the person died, they can draw that energy and actually be visible. So around the port, like Port Washington area, not too far from where you are, it's easy to see. And on the coast here in British Columbia and in northern Washington State, up where the Pacific Ocean squeezes in above Washington State and between Vancouver Island, it creates so much energy. We don't have any more dead people than you do. It's just that they can see them a little easier.
Yeah, Lake Michigan, it has a bit of a Bermuda Triangle type reputation to it, where ships and planes go missing all the time. And then, Wisconsin has tons of lakes and rivers. And you get to Minnesota, which has a plethora of paranormal phenomena attached to it. It's the land of 1,000 lakes or whatever it may be. And yeah, I definitely think that contributes. And then there's a lot of limestone in the area. That's believed to be a potential catalyst. And I don't know if it's the long winters or if it's some peculiar energy in the atmosphere. But Wisconsin seems to have more weird phenomena associated with it than any place I know of. So I don't know if it's the water or if people are going, stir crazy or what it may be. But Wisconsin's very open about it all. I mean, there's a monster everywhere you look. I'm in my home office presently, and I have a map of Wisconsin that's decorated with just dozens of cryptids and things dotting the landscape. And everything's haunted. There's these strange roadside attractions, and then you get to the more real, provable world, and you have all the famous serial killers. It's a very unusual atmosphere in Wisconsin, and I think that's probably why I've sort of adopted it as my home.
Well, it's a great place. You've got, like you say, there's so much water. You got the Mississippi River. You've got Wisconsin.
Yeah.
River. You've got everything moving. Crap little lakes, all really good. And that area too, you've got the American First Nations people been there. Got a huge forests, big, huge national forest north of you, right up onto Lake Superior in the north end. You've got a lot of really good area for very, very natural and supernatural activity.
I mean, you name any type of topic in any paranormal book, and I can guarantee you, I can find something in Wisconsin associated with it. We have a lost pyramid at the bottom of Rock Lake. We have Goatman. We have Dogmen. We have Wendigo sightings and more types of Sasquatch than you could shake a stick at. Marine, tons of lake monsters and curses. Every square block, it seems like there's a ghost. It's if you're into to peculiar things, Wisconsin is like a all-you-can-eat buffet.
It's great, and plus you've got beer. So
you have lots of beer, and you have cheese for your appetizer. And that sounds like a stereotype, and it is a stereotype, but in this case, it is a stereotype for a reason, because it's true. Wisconsin's very proud of the breweries, very proud of the cheese, and they're very proud of their weird creatures and unexplained phenomena.
That's perfect. And hey, guys, if you want to go follow J. Nathan Couch on Facebook, just go to search your J. Nathan Couch on Facebook. You can find his website, JNathan. Go on, my tongue's falling out. J. Nathan Couch. .com. Go to his website, check out what he's got coming up. And if you're in the area, if you're out in that part of Wisconsin, check out the ghost walks. And if you're not, check out ghost walks in your own town. It's a bit of a history. If you like ghosts and you're interested in history, it's where you live. Go look at it. Check it out. People who put these things on aren't trying to pull your leg. You'll actually see some really, really cool parts of the town that you probably didn't even know about, and get a good story with it.
And even if you're a skeptic, I mean, these things, people who go to the trouble to put on a tour, they love history, and you're going to find out something unique about your town. If there's a ghost walk, you're going to find out about some unexplained murder, some missing person, or some town scandal that you never knew existed. So if you're not even interested in the paranormal, you have that to hold your attention, because people who go to this much trouble, they love strange history.
They certainly do. And thank you very much for your time on this. And if anybody's watching any of the old kind of spooky shows, a lot on the you're on the Travel Channel and History Channel and stuff like that too, on a few shows.
Yeah, I was on, see if I can get these right. I was on In Search of Monsters. I believe it was the Wendigo episode. I appeared on that one. And then I was on an episode of Unexplained with William Shatner. I believe it was the cryptozoology episode. That's probably not the exact title, but
that's very cool, though, to be on with Bill. So you're hanging out with Canadians again, right?
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, I wasn't told that Bill was even going to be on the show, and he wasn't there for the recording. And a lot of these shows, they don't even have a host; they just have a narrator. And I assumed that's
Right.
what was going to happen. There's going to be some creepy voice talking when I wasn't. And then, I turn on the TV, and there's William Shatner. I'm like, missed opportunity. But at least I have a connection when they look at my two little appearances on IMDb. There's William Shatner. So I have some connection to a legend at least. So
that is cool. Well, thanks, Nathan, for the time, and I'm going to hit you up again. We're going to talk probably about your haunted Wisconsin things. And
all right, I'd love it.
Do a little more detail into some of the properties you've attended and the stories that you've got, and we'll maybe drag a few stories from your website. Again, if you want to go to the website, if you've got a story, and especially if you live in Wisconsin, come on, you got to pass it on to Nathan. Go to the website jnathancouch.com, click on your story, and let them know about yours. And if we keep feeding them with information, especially if you're from Wisconsin, keep feeding them with information, and we'll try to get them to write a book again.
Yeah, there's lots of unfinished manuscripts that could use your help nudging me to complete it. So it would be very helpful. So
excellent. Well, you have a good New Year, and all the best to you, your wife, and your cat.
All right, and thanks for having me, and good New Year's to you and all the listeners.
Yeah, let's roll. And hey! Let's be careful out there.
Far over the snow, what are those voices? They sing as they go. What are those voices? Look up to the mountain. Wake up. Somebody hide. Somebody better hide. On through the hill like a pack of angry wolves.